a drive, way back, it might be, it could be, it is. Holy cow, welcome to another broadcast of Bricks Behind the Ivy.
Hey, Cub fans, welcome to another episode of Bricks Behind the Ivy. Thank you so much to our awesome sponsors, Wrigleyville Sports, the best sports store in Wrigleyville, and Yagi Road Roasting Company, based in Valparaiso, Indiana, serving cups of coffee just as special as the moments you drink them in.
Hello, welcome to Bricks Behind the Ivy.
Hey, Brickheads! Welcome to a very special edition of Bricks Behind the Ivy, the podcast built for Cub fans, brick by brick behind that Ivy, and it's for Cub fans, by Cub fans. I am your host, Jeff Candid Cubs Ragauskis, lifelong Cubs diehard with blue blood in my veins and potentially an old style at the ball game in hand. Today, we're going to step away from the Ivy and do something a little special. We got a nice interview lined up today. Joining me, the president of the Negro League Baseball Museum, Mr. Bob Kendrick. Bob, thank you so much for coming on Bricks Behind the Ivy.
Man, Jeff, it's so good to see you and great to catch up with you. Thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, not a problem. I'll be honest. I was introduced to who you were through MLB The Show, and we can talk about that, a little bit later on. And it's just such a cool thing that MLB The Show is, teaching kids and folks, even adults like myself, the history of like these great players that maybe not many people were in tune to from a league, that was from a different time in this country where things were a little more separated than they should have been. But there's some, like Buck O'Neil and some of these other players that are just incredible. And, actually today, as we record right now, is the historical anniversary of Buck O'Neil's first game with the Monarchs in 1938, yes. Which shout out to one of my baseball podcast friends, 90-second recap, for his daily episode about his sports history lesson every day was about Buck O'Neil today, which was really cool, and the timing is perfect. But Bob, thank you so much for coming on. And, one of the traditions for Bricks Behind the Ivy guests is we talk about the baseball origin story. For Cub fans, it's always around WGN or familial ties. Like, who introduced you to baseball? How did you get into baseball? And, what were your favorite things about baseball growing up?
I've been a baseball fan since I can remember, probably since the time I was around 4 or 5 years old. I grew up in a small town called Crawfordville, Georgia. Crawfordville, Georgia is east of Atlanta, west of Augusta, all of about 500 people. But my father was a baseball fan. I'm the youngest of 6 boys. They were all baseball fans. They all played, sandlot baseball, or as they called it back then, hardball, where the community towns would come and play. They formed community teams. As a kid, I'm watching them do their thing. And so you naturally gravitated to it. I remember teaching myself how to read a box score out of the old Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And as a kid, Henry Aaron was and is still my all-time favorite baseball player. And Jeff, as I oftentimes tell the story, every day on the playground, I wanted to be Henry Aaron. And I know some other kids wanted to be Henry Aaron sometimes, but I had to be Henry Aaron. And in 1999, I get the opportunity to walk my childhood idol, Henry Aaron, through the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
Oh, wow. And
man, it is the first and only time that I've ever been starstruck, because he meant that much to me. And so every time I was around him, I was reduced to this almost 12-year-old kid that when he hit home run 715 in Atlanta's Fulton County Stadium, I'm at home in my mother's living room in Crawfordville, Georgia. And as he's circling the bases in Atlanta's Fulton County Stadium, I'm circling the bases right alongside him in my mother's living room. So she had an old couch that was first base. The old TV was second base. The other old couch was third base. And her recliner was home plate. And as my childhood idol was touching them all, I'm touching them all too. And here we are, face to face. And I'm getting to walk him through the museum And there's a wonderful photograph. You may have seen it before because it's circulated on the web of a then 18-year-old Henry Aaron standing at the train station in Mobile, Alabama. Jeff, he couldn't have weighed more than 150, 160 pounds. And he looks frail, somewhat afraid, likely leaving home for the very first time. And he had seen the photograph, but it's been a long time. And right at his foot was a duffel bag, cardboard duffel bag. And he looks at the picture, and he looks at me, and he says, Bob, I may have had 2 changes of clothes in that bag, $1.50 in my pocket, and a ham sandwich that my mama had made me, going to go chase that dream. It worked out pretty well for the Hammer. And we've been so blessed. We've had 2 American presidents tour this museum. We had First Lady Laura Bush, First Lady Michelle Obama, the late great General Colin Powell, former Vice President Al Gore, Maya Angelou, Nikki Giovanni, a host of other athletes and entertainers. And as I oftentimes say, with no disrespect, they are not Henry Aaron in my heart and eyes of this kid from Crawfordville, Georgia.
No, I totally understand that. And I think when you have those moments as a kid, when these people you idolize, I think baseball does a better job than some other sports where these larger than life figures like really imprint themselves as a kid. And when you watch baseball, sometimes it's like you're 12 years old or 10 years old all over again. That's the feeling I feel like I face every time, like I have a shrine, obviously, to the Chicago Cubs down here. And, to me, every time I watch a game, it reminds me of, watching on WGN with my grandma and, the players that I tried to emulate, which, hard to believe. For a long at that time, it was Sammy Sosa because of the age that I am. But there was a period of my life that I used to replicate the batting stance of current Cubs manager Craig Counsell, which, got me a lot of flack when I was in junior high because he had I don't know if you're familiar with how ridiculous his batting stance was, but I as a Cubs fan, you gravitate towards teams that are good.
I wanted to do everything like Henry Aaron did it. But here's the thing. As big a fan as I was of Henry Aaron, Jeff, I did not learn that he played in the Negro Leagues until I got involved with this museum. Now, here's my favorite player, and I had no idea that his career had begun in the Negro Leagues as a skinny, cross-handed hitting shortstop. So he was actually a right-hand hitter who was hitting with his left hand on top. And of course, as you know, that is unorthodox. The fear is that you break your wrist hitting in that manner. Well, Henry Aaron was knocking the cover off the baseball in a highly unorthodox fashion. When he gets to the Clowns, they put the right hand on top. And the rest, of course, as they say, is history. But I'm saying to myself, how in the world could I not know this? So this really was the gateway. It was the portal for me wanting to learn even more. And I guess I've become self-absorbed in this history ever since. That was in 1993 when I started as a volunteer for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And I still find this history as fascinating today as I did when I walked into what was then a one-room Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in 1993. And here I am 32 years later, still learning every day and want to learn as much as I can about this history. And of course, I get the opportunity to share it with others.
Yeah, I think, for myself, I was, I'll say ignorant to, the stats and the fame of some of the players that were in the Negro Leagues and things like MLB The Show, open access for that. Believe it or not, I started going to the All-Star game with a buddy of mine after the pandemic and seeing, the displays for the Negro Leagues there. And I described the All-Star game to folks, so it's like the United Nations of baseball. And it really opened the door to me to this idea of like my world of baseball was too small, that like everything I had viewed through the lens of the Cubs, and here I go to the All-Star game, and here are people who are just as passionate as I am, but from other parts of the world, other parts of the country, and like learning about this game that has this robust history that like I had unfortunately and unintendedly ignored. And I think that's interesting, talking about what you had learned about Hank Aaron. So obviously you said you started there in 1993. How did you end up getting to the Negro League Museum? Was this like a plan? Was it an opportunity?
No. It was completely by happenstance. I started here at the museum as a volunteer in 1993. I got introduced to the museum while I was working for then the Kansas City Star, the daily newspaper. And I was working in the Star's promotions department, and I was senior copywriter in the promotions department, which functioned as the Star's in-house advertising agency. And so this fledgling Negro Leagues Baseball Museum had approached the paper about promotional space to promote a traveling exhibition that was going to debut here in a storefront space right across the street from where my office is here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And honestly, Jeff, I didn't even know there was a Negro Leagues Museum at that time. This is 1993. And I said, well, I better go find this museum and do a little background research so I can put the promotional campaign together. I pull up in front of the Lincoln Building, which still operates. And I go up to the third floor and I'm looking for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And I finally get to an office and I peek my head in, and the late Don Motley, who was the executive director of the museum, was sitting there behind the desk. And I say, I'm looking for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And man, he looks up at me and he smiles. He says, son, you're standing in it. It was just this one room office, no bigger than my office space is here. And as I oftentimes tell my student audience when I go speak, little did I know that I had literally just walked into what would become my passion. I fell in love with the museum, and I fell in love with the mission and those amazing athletes who made this story. And I considered myself to be a baseball fan. And I quickly realized I didn't know a doggone thing about the history of this game and its connection to the history of this country. And I became engrossed in it. I wanted to learn as much as I could, and I didn't want to keep it to myself. I wanted everybody else to feel the same way that I felt about it. Now, I had no idea that it was going to turn into a career. I just wanted to do whatever I could to assist this organization so that it could fulfill its mission. As fate would have it, it did indeed turn into a career. I became the museum's first director of marketing in 1998. Left my corporate job and stepped out, and became the museum's first director of marketing. I served in that role for 12 years. I left briefly in 2010 to go run another not-for-profit organization. 13 months later, I was coming back being introduced as the president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, a role that I've been in for the last 14 years. But man, what an incredible story to go from being a volunteer to now trying to lead what I believe is one of the most important cultural institutions in the world, that being the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And I can tell you now, this museum has given me far more than I could ever give it. I still have pinch myself kinds of moments. As a Cub fan, you can appreciate this. There would be days my receptionist would call into my office, said, Mr. Kendrick, Ernie Banks is on the phone for you. And I'm saying to myself, Ernie Banks is on the phone for me? Henry Aaron is on the phone for you. Willie Mays is on the phone for you. Minnie Minoso over on the other side of town of you, south side of Chicago, on the phone. And these are still pinch myself kinds of moments. It comes along with the territory and the role. But, I'm a kid, again, from Crawfordville, Georgia, 500 people, man. What a tremendous blessing this has been to be a steward of this story, to have a hand in making sure that the legacy of the Negro Leagues plays on long after there are no more Negro Leaguers left to attest to how great this league actually was.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect transition to my next question and topic. And we talked a little bit off air about, so in 2023, MLB The Show, for those listening not familiar, is, the only Major League Baseball video game left, which is very different from my childhood. But, Ramon Russell, who's one of the directors over there, had said that, when they announced this, they have this feature called Storylines, which is prominently featured at this moment, stories from the Negro Leagues, introducing players to people like Buck O'Neil, Tony Stone, which my daughter has actually really gotten into that because, a girl that plays baseball and, adding women to the game has been a huge thing. Baseball to me is like a lot of things in life is about accessibility and being able to imagine yourself in the shoes of superheroes and sports stars and all these things. So representation is so important. So how did the Storylines idea come to mind? Like, when did you first hear from MLB The Show? And were you hesitant at first about doing this, or were you like all in on the opportunity?
No, there was no hesitation. And I wish I could tell you that it was my idea. And I guess I could, but I'd be lying. It wasn't my idea. Sony reached out to me. Ramon and team reached out to me. And honestly, Jeff, they wanted to temper my expectations. They basically said, Bob, we are thinking about the possibility of putting the Negro Leagues into MLB The Show. And the more we met, the more stories that I told, the more interested they became in this. And man, the next thing I know, there was a full-fledged camera crew here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, and they sat me down and said, start telling stories about these players. And initially, the game was that game in 23 was actually supposed to be released in 24. Okay. But they loved the content so much that they moved it up a year early. And they were so smart because, Jeff, they could have just put the Negro League players in with stats, but no context behind them. That would have been a disservice. We wanted the gamer to be able to learn who these players were. And the idea behind Storylines was to create these short vignettes. And of course, they put a killer soundtrack around it and had me tell stories. I knew, though, that the gamer would love the players. I mean, what's not to love about the swagger of Satchel Paige?
Yeah.
Or the mythical-like power of Josh Gibson, or the speed of Cool Papa Bell. But the fact that the gamers are loving the stories, now that surprised me a little bit. And the fact that they appreciate the guy that's telling the stories. I have had scores and scores and scores of kids and young adults who have come to this museum because they saw the museum in the video game. And they all want to meet the guy that's telling the stories. So I've become a household name within the gaming community, but it has by far been the biggest thing this museum has ever done, with the inclusion of the Negro Leagues in the biggest baseball video game in the world, MLB The Show. Because as you know, the gaming platform is so big. I think I was a little naive about how expansive the gaming platform actually is. This is bigger than film. It is bigger than the music industry. So we're talking about millions upon millions of young people and young adults who are not only learning about the Negro Leagues, but they're falling in love with the Negro Leagues because we put it in a mode and medium in which they were accustomed to engaging with. And for those who believe that our children don't care about history, they are wrong. They do care, but it is also incumbent upon how history is presented to them. When we put it in the video game and they got to engage with it, it just resonated. And I got kids coming here, man, they want to show me how Satchel did his double pump wind up, the high leg kick that Satchel was famous for. They want to throw the B-ball like Satchel threw the B-ball. All these stories that we couldn't have reached that many young people by those coming through the turnstiles in the next 20 years. And that's how impactful this has been.
No, it truly is unbelievable. And, as a gamer myself, you're like the way that you present the stories in the game too is so awesome. And like, it really feels like this cool history lesson. I know that, Sony San Diego, I'm not sure if you got to be by, has like presented this stuff in special like meetings with the government and stuff like that, showing, the positivity of what video games can do. Cause there's always commentary about violence.
With them when we did a couple of demonstrations for folks there in Congress. And we've been very fortunate. The game has been so well received that we've won a number of educational awards for how we're using a video game to teach history. And folks are saying that all these sports games should incorporate history the way that we've done with MLB The Show and the Negro Leagues mode storylines. And it was just a special and unique way to do this. And it just warms my heart that people have embraced it the way that they have. When we were creating the content, we were hopeful that people would enjoy it. But you don't know until it's actually introduced. And many people have said what you said to me when we were off camera, that it is their favorite mode within the entire video game.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. It really is. And I'm a person that is starting to appreciate baseball history. I've always understood it from the Cubs lens. And, I think I like to tell people baseball is like a soap opera. Like you can watch it on a Tuesday and figure out, what's going on and really appreciate it. But it's the 30, 40 years of the soap opera being on TV that makes each interaction special. Like baseball is very much a sport that is built on its history, and understanding its history and why things are the way they are makes the modern interactions that much more impactful. And that's something that I've come to appreciate. And I think the Storylines is doing such a great job of presenting history of baseball and this part of times where maybe it's not something we are very proud of as a country, but like here are these great stories of these great baseball players that maybe people didn't know about. And it's not, I know there's a lot of fanfare for Jackie Robinson and what he was able to do in breaking the color barrier, but there are a lot of these players like Josh Gibson and stuff. And as in 2020, when Major League Baseball finally started incorporating their statistics in the record books, like you look at how great some of these players were playing with, very solid competition as well. Like it's just truly unbelievable, the things that we don't know if we're not exposed to them. And it's amazing what MLB The Show has been able to, open my eyes to players I didn't know about.
No, it's been incredible. And, as we're recording this right now, just before I jumped on with you, I had Mason Wynn and Jordan Walker from the St. Louis Cardinals here at the museum. And we walked through the museum and we finished the tour, and Jordan comes over to me because he wanted to know a little bit more about John Donaldson. And he had discovered John Donaldson in the video game, MLB The Show. And he says, man, I can't hit John Donaldson. Well, I said, don't feel bad, because in real life, they couldn't hit John Donaldson. John Donaldson is one of the greatest pitchers of all time. He's not the household name like Satchel Paige and some of the other names that are in the video game, but Donaldson is in the video game. Over 400 verifiable wins, over 5,000 strikeouts. He is the inventor of the slider. Yeah. Oh, wow. And John Donaldson was so good that he was really what Satchel Paige aspired to be. Satchel wanted to be John Donaldson. He had the charisma. He would do some of the same things that we hailed Satchel for having done, call the outfield in, sit the infield down as he would strike out the final batter of a game, those kinds of things. John Donaldson was doing that in the 19th century, however, because he played primarily pre-Negro Leagues. He was still playing by the time that the Negro Leagues were established, but he was a shell of himself by that time. And of course, he would go on to become a scout, spent some time there in Chicago as a scout, scouting for the White Sox. And so, but to hear Jordan ask me about John Donaldson, that gives you an indication of the impact of this video game.
It's nice to hear too that Major League Baseball players struggle to hit him just as I struggle, which makes them feel so much more human to me now. Because they can hit pitches in real life, and I can't hit them in a video game. So we're gonna wrap up today with just some rapid fire questions. Like we call this around the horn. I was gonna ask your favorite historical player. It's obviously Henry Aaron. Which is there anyone that's a close second that you want to mention that you're really inspired to?
Well, the fact that I got to spend time with the great Willie Mays.
Okay.
And to be there with Willie Mays, and we're out in San Francisco. And I'd gone out to speak to a youth group there in the San Francisco area, but we go to the ballpark, and they were having a memorial service that day at the ballpark prior to the game starting. And so Willie and all these other legendary giants, Willie McCovey, Felipe Alou, Barry Bonds was there that day as well because he was then working for the Marlins. And so they arranged for me to have private time with Willie Mays. Now, again, think about what I just said.
Yeah, that's incredible.
I get private time with Willie Mays. So, again, this is another one of those pinch myself kind of moments. And so my host was the big sports talk show radio host, Brian Murphy. And so Murph asked Willie, said, Willie, did you ever face Satchel Paige? And Jeff, Willie lights up like a Christmas tree. And if you know Mr. Mays, he had a very high-pitched voice. He says, yes, I faced Satchel. I faced Satchel when I was 17 years old. The first time I faced Satchel, I got a double off of him. He's telling the truth. Young Willie Mays, Satchel didn't know who this kid was. He kind of grew one in. Young Willie Mays hits it in the gap, gets a double. Well, Satchel looks over at third base, and he tells the third baseman, he said, hey, man, you let me know when he comes back up. Couple innings later, here comes young Willie Mays. The third baseman said, hey, Satch, there he is. And so Satchel on the mound, and he's talking to young Willie. He says, son, I ain't going to try to trick you. I'm going to throw you 3 fastballs. And even at 17 years old, Willie Mays is saying to himself, you ain't going to throw me 3 fastballs that I know of. And Mr. Mays says, he threw 3 straight right by me. I never saw him. And he said, as he was turning to go back to the dugout, Satchel, after he releases the 3rd strike, he's walking toward young Willie Mays. And he says, now go sit down, little boy. And to hear Willie Mays tell this story about being struck out by Satchel Paige tells you how great Satchel Paige really was. And I'm getting this firsthand standing there in the player's garage with Willie Mays. And he has his assistant reach in his bag, and he hands us his number 24 suite tickets so that we could watch the game from Willie Mays' suite. I mean, come on, man. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. These are the things that, again, I'm so tremendously blessed to have an opportunity to do this work and create memories that'll be lasting memories. These are things that I will remember, as my late mother would say, as long as I'm in my natural mind.
So we know your favorite historical players. Do you have a favorite current player that you like to watch?
No, there are a lot of guys I enjoy. We got one here in Kansas City that I enjoy watching. I think he's one of the baddest young ball players in the country, and that being Bobby Witt Jr. Witt can do everything. He is sensational. We haven't had this kind of 5-tool guy. Hit for power, hit for average, can field, could run, could throw. And man, what a joy it is to watch him almost every day play here for our Royals. And he's part of the reason that the Royals have had this resurgence. I really enjoy watching him play. I enjoy watching Ellie De La Cruz play. Man, the young man can run. And he's just a sensational athlete. I mean, you got to love Shohei Ohtani. I mean, how could you not enjoy watching him play? My friend Mookie Betts over there at the Dodgers, Freddie Freeman, still doing it. One of the sweetest swings in all of baseball. is Freddie Freeman. And there's a score of young ball players who are coming into Major League Baseball that are making their imprint. As I mentioned, walking Mason Wynn through this museum. And Mason, they haven't had a shortstop there in St. Louis quite like Mason since Ozzie Smith, the Wizard, who's a dear friend of mine. And so it's exciting to see these young ball players, this next generation of young ball players emerge. And so I just enjoy the game so much. And I don't get to the ballpark as much as I'd like to, because when I'm there, I'm usually working, I'm entertaining, I've got some business related things, but it's still good just to go to the ballpark and be a fan. Just sit down and watch and enjoy the game.
Do you have a favorite ballpark food?
Oh man, I'm a hot dog nacho kind of guy. We do an annual festival here that I created, I don't know, a little over a decade ago, called the Heart of America Hot Dog Festival, where we celebrate annually baseball and hot dogs. And it was just a crazy idea that I had. But I mean, what is more synonymous with the game of baseball than the all-American hot dog? And even though these ballparks have all this fancy food, when I go to the ballpark, I just want a hot dog and some nachos with some jalapeno peppers, and I am good to go. So it is still by far my favorite ballpark food.
So outside of baseball, do you have a hobby, or is baseball what consumes your life?
Well, I'm lamenting the fact that I've just had recent surgery on my knee, so I can't play golf. I am a hard golfer, man. I'm dying. We had such a brutal winter here in Kansas City. Winter finally breaks. The weather is great, and I tear up my knee. And I'm not going to be able to play golf. I don't know when I'm going to be able to swing the club again, but that has become one of my passions. I got a group of guys. We travel all over the country to go play golf. I'm an avid golfer. I didn't say I was a good golfer, but I'm an avid golfer.
I still can't hit a golf ball. I can't take my baseball swing out of it. I broke a buddy's club when I tried, and I just have never gone back. It's an expensive hobby I don't need. I clearly have plenty of hobbies. So,
It beats me up to no end, and I can't wait to get back to it. I mean, it drives you crazy. And if anybody treated me as bad as golf did, I wouldn't deal with them ever again. But golf, I can't wait to get back.
Well, Bob, thank you so much for your time today. I wanted to give you some time to plug socials for the museum and yourself. And I know that currently there's been some grants, and you guys are gathering donations for expansion of the museum, 20,000 additional square feet, looking for a sports science center, research library, event center, and a rooftop center for different things. And, this has become such a hallmark with, the help of all the work that you've done, the exposure to MLB The Show. This is a must-see place. I have not been. It's my buddy and I were just actually talking about when we usually do the All-Star game every year, and we're like, we should do one year where we go do a Royals game and go to the museum, which is like on the top of our list of things you want to do. But it's getting time away from my kids and my wife.
No, you've got to make that pilgrimage to Kansas City to experience the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. I'm biased, but I think it's the best baseball history museum anywhere in the world, because it's not predicated on the stuff that we have. And we've got enough stuff to bring the story to life. It's about the story. It's about a very powerful, compelling, inspirational story that had escaped the pages of American history books. And that's what people gravitate to. And it's an amazing story, but it's not a sad story. And I do think, Jeff, that people think it's going to be a sad, somber story because it's anchored against the ugliness of American segregation. But here it's about what emerged out of segregation. This wonderful story of triumph and conquest. And it's all based on one small, simple principle. You won't let me play with you in the major leagues. I'll create a league of my own. And what a league it was. It would operate for 40 years, from 1920 through 1960. And it would provide a playing field for some of the best Black and Hispanic talent to showcase their world-class baseball abilities. And it would be the Negro Leagues that would ultimately change Major League Baseball for the better, but also change our country for the better. And you're right. We are dreaming now out loud of building a brand new 30+ thousand square foot standalone Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, going to be built right around the corner from where we operate now, adjacent to the former Paseo YMCA. That is the very building that the Negro Leagues were established in by a Chicagoan by the name of Rube Foster. And we're saving that historic landmark. We will build a new museum adjacent to it. The campaign is called Pitch for the Future. And we would encourage any and everyone, if you can, consider making a donation to assist this effort to build this new Negro Leagues campus. Man, what a long way from a one-room office to today being recognized as America's national Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, to now being on the cusp of building an international headquarters for Black baseball and social history. You can learn more about the campaign at nlbm.com. As I oftentimes say, there's no donation too small, and of course, there's no donation too large, but every buck counts as we try to raise about $35 million to build this new state-of-the-art facility. You can follow me on social media at NLBMPrez, that's on X, as well as Instagram, and the museum at NLBM Museum KC to find out every and anything that's happening in and around the world of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
Well, Bob, thank you so much. And before we get going, we do have to do one more ad plug. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review on your favorite podcast app. It helps us find more brickheads like you find the show. And if you haven't already, head over to our YouTube page and hit that subscribe button down below for the Bleacher Bunch Network, your one-stop shop for all things Cubs. We've got several shows: Cubs PS Plus with Mike Waller, Sun Ranto with Danny Rocket, Cup of Cubby Blue with Sarah Sanchez, the weekly live The Bleacher Bunch Show that features all of us, and Baseball Rabbit Hole with Michael Cotton. And if you are a Patreon subscriber, you get the daily Cubs game recap show called Cubs Pod. So if you want that additional content, make sure you head over to Patreon, Bleacher Bunch, and subscribe today. I'll also put in the description for those who want to look at the Negro League Baseball Museum and donate to this just amazing museum and cause. I'll put a link in the description so that you guys can check out that. There's a video about the plans and the future of this museum. Bob Kendrick, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been another episode of Bricks Behind the Ivy. We'll see you guys again soon. And as always, go Cubs.